This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with a heartbreaking story. 4 teenagers died last night in a crash in Gilbert Plains, a town of 800 people in Manitoba. A 5th teenager is seriously injured. The superintendent of the local school division tells CBC some of the children who died were graduating this year and looking forward to their futures. As CBC's Bartley Kivas reports, the western Manitoba town is reeling.
RCMP say a car with 5 teens inside ran a stop sign and collided with a semi-trailer. It happened Wednesday night at the intersection of Highway 5 and Provincial Road 274. RCMP say 2 17-year-old boys and the 18-year-old male driver died at the scene of the collision. All 3 were from the Dauphin area. An 18-year-old woman from Carberry was taken to hospital where she was pronounced dead. A 15-year-old girl from the rural municipality of Dauphin is in hospital with serious injuries. The semi-driver isn't hurt. James Mansher, the Reeve of Gilbert Plains, says there's nothing unusual about the intersection. He says he's lived most of his life in Gilbert Plains and can't recall anything on the scale of this incident. There are about 1,500 people in the municipality.
It's going to be tough on the parents, tough on the relatives, tough on our first responders, tough on the whole community, in fact. So you know the size of it. We know everybody here, and even if we don't know, we're aware of the families and everything. So it's going to be hard no matter what your relationship would be with any of the victims.
Mountain View School Division says 3 of the teens who died and the injured girl were students. Gilbert Plains Collegiate is open today and Friday for people to gather and get support. Bartley Kivas, CBC News, Winnipeg.
In a move that Indigenous people have been calling for decades, the Vatican says it is repudiating the doctrine of discovery. That's a set of theories backed by papal decrees written in the 1400s. They were used to justify colonization and racism and still form the foundation of some property law. CBC's Olivia Stefanovich reports.
The call was made loud and clear, but there was no immediate answer. Now, 8 months after Pope Francis visited Canada, the Roman Catholic Church signaling a new direction is needed. The Vatican distancing itself from the doctrine of discovery, an instrument of oppression used to dispossess Indigenous peoples.
I was pleased and relieved. Because we have been waiting for such a long time for this to come to pass.
The move comes as Pope Francis battles a respiratory infection in hospital. Exactly 1 year after First Nations, Inuit, and Métis delegates met the Pope at the Vatican. It also follows decades of advocacy from residential school survivors and Indigenous leaders like Phil Fontaine.
We can quibble over words, right? This is missing or that's missing. It's a pretty profound statement.
The Vatican statement is deliberate. It uses the word repudiate instead of rescind or reject.
I think it's clear that this is a small step along the way.
This Canadian Archbishop worked with the Vatican to craft the language.
It's a step, though, right? I mean, where we want to go is to a place where we have right relations, where Indigenous peoples are not at all marginalized in society.
Today is a positive step. It is much more than the religious reification of a doctrine.
The Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations says it will have ripple effects across the country.
If we are truly on a path and on a plane of equals, what do we do to embody our relationship going forward?
Archbishop Boland says the answer is to replace the old doctrine with a new one, based on solidarity with Indigenous peoples. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, locally, residential school survivors, First Nations, scholars, and knowledge keepers welcome the Vatican's disavowal of the doctrine of discovery. As CBC's Josh Crabb reports, some say Canada needs to follow suit.
During his visit to Canada last summer, the Pope was met with calls to rescind the doctrine of discovery. Knowledge keeper and former Long Plain First Nation chief Ernie Daniels, a residential school survivor who met Pope Francis in Alberta, is glad the Vatican listened and formally repudiated it.
The surface level looks good, sounds good, feels good.
Daniels says the effects of the doctrine of discovery are still being felt today through the impacts of the residential school system. The decrees that formed the doctrine itself were used as justification by European countries in the taking of Indigenous lands, according to University of Manitoba law professor Brenda Gunn. She says it's a significant step for the Church to take.
But now it's up for Canada and other colonial states to really think about what does that mean for their assertions of sovereignty in the country.
Cree lawyer and former Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief Kenneth Young, a residential school survivor from Opaskwayak Cree Nation, says it's only the first step.
I'll be happier if the courts and the governments agree to say that the doctrine is gone.
Repudiating the doctrine is among the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. The next steps are something residential school survivors will be watching closely, according to Jennifer Wood, a survivor herself who works with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation.
So this news will definitely turn another chapter towards the governments to look at things differently.
University of Manitoba Native Studies professor Negon Sinclair says at some point the government will have to repudiate the doctrine too.
It may not do so in the near future because of the legal problems that it would cause, but the fact is that you have to be able to rebuild your relationships with Indigenous nations, and that means returning stolen land.
Federal Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller told CBC by phone he doesn't have all the answers about what the government will do now.
So this is part of a greater discussion on the inherent right of Indigenous communities to self-determination, a matter of respect, recognizing that these policies did have the effects that they did.
Miller says the doctrine has underpinned relations with Indigenous communities, and there will have to be more discussions on what to do next. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A retired priest accused of assaulting a First Nations girl at a Manitoba residential school more than 50 years ago has been acquitted. To some, the details in this report may be upsetting. CBC's Brittany Greenslade has the latest.
Father Arthur Massey stared straight ahead, expressionless, as the judge read her decision. And in those few moments, tears started to fill the eyes of Victoria McIntosh as the man she says assaulted her was acquitted.
The 93-year-old former priest walked into the courthouse the same way he left. Quiet, never saying a word, except this time he left knowing the charges against him were over. Victoria McIntosh alleged she was assaulted by Massey in a bathroom of the Fort Alexander Residential School when she was 10 years old. Justice Candice Gramond called Massey's testimony self-serving and disingenuous. She says she believes McIntosh was assaulted, but couldn't say for certain it was him who did it. I have concluded, when taken as a whole, her identification of the accused was not sufficiently reliable to convince me beyond a reasonable doubt that he perpetrated an assault, she said. It was a verdict the full courtroom was not expecting, and one that left McIntosh's supporters angry.
There's no justice. No justice has been served here today.
It was very quiet in there when that verdict was announced.
Yeah, it took everything in me to not jump up and say this is bullshit.
There have been convictions in similar cases in Canada, but in those that led to jail time, either the accused pled guilty or there were multiple charges and victims who came forward. Here, despite a decade-long investigation that involved RCMP speaking to hundreds of people and taking 75 witness and victim statements, they were only able to lay one charge with one victim.
Overall, they are very difficult cases because of the passage of time and the fact that the evidence has been affected. Obviously, you would like to have a matter that's before the court as earliest as you can to preserve evidence.
The community of Saugeen is continuing to support McIntosh and others who've struggled with what happened at residential schools. Brittany Greenslade, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Brenda Gunn, the research director at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, says there needs to be a better way for the justice system to help residential school survivors.
So disappointing. I think everyone continues to feel the frustration that there doesn't seem to be processes in Canada that are set up to assist Indigenous peoples in getting justices for the profound abuse that many experienced at residential schools.
Gunn says Indigenous justice focuses less on proving crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. They're more concerned with what's happening, what had happened, and with repairing the harm done. Emotional support is available to anyone affected by residential schools and upset by stories like this. You can access crisis referral services by calling the 24-hour support line that's listed on your screen. There are two of them there. One of them's Hope for Wellness. It also has a hotline, and if you don't have a pen to write down the phone numbers, you'll find that hotline number at wellness.ca. Former Conservative MP Candice Bergen will help lead the Manitoba Progressive Conservatives into this fall's election. Bergen has signed on to co-chair the PC's election campaign. The Portage-Lisgar MP recently stepped away from federal politics after 15 years in office. Bergen says she sees her role as uniting the provincial Tories and standing behind Premier Heather Stefanson. The PC heads into the October 3rd election, having trailed the opposition New Democrats in opinion polls for 2 years. Bergen served as interim federal Conservative leader after Erin O'Toole was ousted by caucus members last year. Despite decades of effort to increase diversity, the vast majority of Winnipeg police officers are still white men. Experts say that needs to change. CBC's Emily Brass explains why.
Winnipeg is one of Canada's most diverse cities, and that diversity continues to grow. In the city of about 835,000, 31% of Winnipeggers are ethnoculturally diverse, 12% are Indigenous, and 51% are female. So why does the city's police force look like this? There is parity with Indigenous officers, who make up 12% of the force, but just 8.6% of Winnipeg police officers are racialized, and only 16.2% are women. So why is that a problem? University of Manitoba criminologist Frank Cormier says to keep Winnipeggers safe, the WPS needs more officers who aren't male and white.
The person who responds is someone who can understand the person that they're trying to help. Because they have a shared lived experience, they're going to be far more effective in trying to help that person. Less likely to misunderstand or misapprehend what the situation is and perhaps act in a way that is not warranted.
Constable Dale McDonald started back in 1994, and she was only the second Black female police officer in Winnipeg history, and she often ran into sexism on the job.
If it was a male that had called and wants to report something, he would literally look over my shoulder and talk to my male partner, and my partner would be like, she's taking your report. Okay, but then he would still look over my shoulder and talk to the partner. So there was still a little bit of that, but I think that's changed.
McDonald now works on the diversity unit, doing community outreach and visiting schools. She says seeing a Black female cop can help people from diverse communities open up.
Someone who looks like me said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I think just seeing that representation, they felt more comfortable to come talk to me about an issue, and then we were able to discuss it together and try to find a solution.
McDonald says only about 4 or 5 cops in the city are Black women, a tiny fraction of its 1,355 officers. Winnipeg police are holding workshops this spring to attract more racialized and female recruits. They launched a new mentoring unit last year, helping candidates with things like resume writing and the physical abilities test. Cormier says not having more diversity on the force could have dire consequences.
The least damage is that our police just aren't very good at what we want them to do. The worst case is that we start to end up in a situation that looks more like the United States, where people are dying, lives are being lost, innocent people are being killed simply because our police services are not well enough informed and are not reflective of the populations that they serve.
Manitoba MP Nikki Ashton wants the government and the world's governing soccer body to make the sport more accessible to kids in the north. Ashton says Canada co-hosting the 2026 World Cup will build excitement among young soccer fans. But she says communities need money to pay for equipment and programs. 18-year-old Amy Singh Young of Opaskwayak Cree Nation has been playing soccer for many years. She says she was forced to play on women's teams, even as a much younger teenager, because there weren't many opportunities for kids in the north.
So if we had leagues and other tournaments for my own age, which we didn't, we would get more opportunities to go play for universities, maybe even Team Canada, which I wanted to do, but it's still a dream of mine.
It would be awesome if that dream came true for her. I know a lot of people are dreaming about getting outside, playing all kinds of sports, but it's still so chilly.
Yeah, it's so chilly. The ground is frozen. It's covered in snow. And I'm going to talk about a couple of occasions here where we could have a couple of opportunities for more snow on the way, and it's all coming up here. But first, we're going to talk about the cold weather and our temperature. Normal high, 5 degrees. We're at -3 right now. We did get to -2, my forecast high today. Northwest winds nice and light, so what a difference from yesterday. And last evening, the winds were really strong as well, but very light winds today, so that -2 earlier was feeling pretty decent, even seeing a little bit of melting going on, and that's because those sun's rays are out there. A nice high sun angle now. Not much cloud anywhere in the province, really. You look to the south and to the north, and there really isn't much to see. Got a bit of a weak system to the southwest of us, but it's really kind of dying out in Montana. So high pressure kind of protecting us here in the southern prairies, and there it is, sitting right over central parts of Manitoba. So we're in a bit of a northerly flow today until that high pressure starts to move out to the east. So tonight into Friday morning, lots of clear sky. As we head through the day in northern Manitoba, we may start to see a little bit of snow on the western edge of the province, maybe Flin Flon, Lynn Lake, and then on into the afternoon into the Thompson area. So anywhere out of that cloud you see there, all while we are in the sunshine here across the south. And tomorrow is a northerly wind again because of the clockwise circulation around that high, north at about 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. Then as we get into Saturday, that high starts to move to the east. That gives us a southerly wind that in the afternoon will start to really pick up, especially in the Red River Valley. More on that in just a second, but it'll be a gusty day out of the south. Generally sunny, and we'll see some cloud across the north. And then on into Sunday, we're looking out to the west and seeing this clipper system that will bring a rain-snow mix or a slushy day into southern Manitoba as we head through the day on Sunday. All right, I'm going to get to more on the wind in a second and your forecast, but I want to look at the middle of next week. The American model, the GFS, and the GEM, the Canadian model, and the European model all starting to come together on a midweek storm that looks to me like a Colorado low. And you see these little black lines. The closer they are together, the windier it will be. So this is snow and wind Wednesday, April 5th for southern Manitoba and mainly the southeast. The track may change. This is still 6 days away. The track may change, the timing may change, and we will keep you posted on that. I want to go right through here, through Friday and on into Saturday, because that's when winds start to get strong through the Red River Valley, winds gusting to 50 or higher on that particular afternoon. -12, not much weather tonight, good stargazing night, and there have been lots of pictures online of some northern lights, so may see that again tonight. And then tomorrow we start the day at -12. It's a -2, but it's much windier, north 30 to 40. And then in the long range, we've got 3 to 5 centimeters of slush, even some freezing rain in the morning on Sunday, but we get to 2 degrees cooler and cloudy, Janet, on Monday. And again, mid next week, I'll be tracking that very carefully.
Good. We'll be relying on you. So thanks very much, John. We'll talk to you a little later in the show. There's a new exhibit at the Winnipeg Art Gallery, Kalmayork. Inuit Saunaganit. Art Against Time is a collection of nearly 400 pieces produced by artists from Canada, Siberia, Alaska, and Greenland. The exhibit opens tomorrow night with a free celebration and runs through to January. CBC videographer Tyson Koscheck checked it out.
So my name is Jocelyn Piernan, and I am one of the co-curators of this exhibition. This exhibition is titled Inuit Sinauginiit, Art Across Time, and it's an expansive show by Inuit artists from across the circumpolar north. It really is telling Inuit history, Inuit culture, what Inuit have been making for millennia.
I'm Darlene Coward-White, and I'm the curator of Inuit art here at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. I'm very excited to be able to have these pieces in the exhibition. They are from the Ukvik Old Bering Sea 1 period in Alaska. Well, these pieces date from about 200 BC. The designs are so simple, and these are ivory. This is actually a pregnant figure, this little one here. And it would have probably been used as an amulet to protect perhaps a pregnant woman. And it's so fortunate that these were preserved in the permafrost, as you know, and have been excavated just really in the last 60, 70 years.
For Inuit, the tradition of storytelling is really important. And you can see that within the pieces themselves.
The styles are different, actually. The stones are different, the styles are different. Some communities are more abstract. It's really interesting just to see the variations, the variety. It's not a stereotypical, the seals and bears that you see in airport gift shops.
What's interesting about this show too is that it does cover a lot of different geographies. Within that, you do get to see that diversity of the cultures, of how Inuit have lived in Greenland or Siberia. These are a set of what are called tupilaks, and these are figures that were normally carved out of walrus tooth. They were figures that were used to kind of instill a lot of fear into their foes, into their enemies. Again, that grotesque mouths and eyes and teeth that are coming out of them.
Well, this is by an artist from Arctic Bay at the north end of Baffin Island, actually. His name is Manasi Akpeliapik. He is showing a shaman in the center with his helping spirits. We've got owls and ancestors. It's really an amazing piece, the way he's used the natural shapes of the bone with some of the vertebrae, the way he's integrated all the different elements, the animals and the ancestors and all the spirits that would help the shaman do his work.
I hope that for Inuit who come to see this, they can take away what their ancestors had gone through. And also, by studying these, you get a sense of then how to make your own and be inspired by it.
The Mass Casualty Commission, looking into the 2020 Portapique, Nova Scotia shootings, has released its report. We'll have the findings coming up. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been indicted by a grand jury in Manhattan. The 76-year-old is now the first former or sitting U.S. president to be charged with a crime. Trump faces charges in connection with payments made to an adult film actress during his 2016 presidential campaign. He paid $130,000 to Stormy Daniels to remain silent about an extramarital affair. The specific charges will be announced when he is arraigned. Trump has denied any wrongdoing. He's expected to surrender to authorities in New York next week. Trump is currently campaigning to be the Republican candidate for the presidency in 2024. The public inquiry that investigated the 2020 mass shooting in Nova Scotia has issued its final report, and it is scathing. It slams the RCMP for widespread failures in their response to Canada's worst mass shooting. It makes 130 recommendations, including steps to overhaul the federal force. CBC's Blair Rhodes has details from Halifax.
Commission Chair Michael McDonald says it was not their role to assign blame.
However, we do not shy away from declaring hard truths and accountability. We identify them precisely so we can learn from them and do better.
One of those hard truths was the confusion surrounding RCMP operations that weekend. The Commission says there was no clear command structure and that officers in the field weren't sure who they should be dealing with. The Mounties were also ill-prepared for what they were dealing with. The Commission found that RCMP policies on crisis like this were out of date and their training was inadequate. They trained for a static situation in a building, not a gunman driving around shooting people at random and leaving fires in his wake. While their internal communications were flawed, their communications with the public were even worse. One vague tweet on the night of the 18th and nothing more until the next morning. And a delay in telling people that the gunman was driving a replica RCMP cruiser. McDonald was asked whether he believes the RCMP understands the need for change.
I can say it no better than Officer Campbell on the stand when he apologized for failing and saying he would do better.
I apologize for failing.
He, in a very heartfelt way, said to the world that we failed you and we'll do better. And he's a high-ranking RCMP member.
But Campbell is gone, transferred to New Brunswick. The same is true of every other senior Mountie who is in charge in April of 2020, up to and including Commissioner Brenda Lucki. They've all either retired or been transferred. Her replacement offered an apology of sorts.
I'm deeply sorry for the unimaginable pain and suffering.
But Duhaime stopped short of apologizing for what the Mounties did that weekend, saying they did the best they could with what they had. Duhaime says he needs more time to study the Commission's recommendations, but he's committing the RCMP to making the necessary changes. Michael McDonald says he's optimistic that his Commission's report won't join others gathering dust on a government shelf somewhere. He says that's because he expects stakeholders, including the families of the 22 victims, to hold people's feet to the fire to make sure that this time something is done. Blair Rhodes, CBC News, Truro.
The report examined the causes of the mass shooting, which began with the shooter violently attacking his spouse. The inquiry looked at the killer's long history of violence toward his spouse and the failures of police to act on it. Gareth Hampshire has the latest now.
A public health emergency is how the Mass Casualty Commission characterizes gender-based intimate partner and family violence. Likening it to the COVID-19 pandemic, the inquiry members say a wide-ranging reaction is needed from everyone.
When we talk about violence prevention, we also talk about it in terms of a public health approach. And we have to address the root causes of violence.
The Commission thinks a lot can be learned from the treatment of Lisa Banfield, the gunman's partner. Their findings are that she suffered physical violence and threats, as well as emotional and many other kinds of abuse. But that following the shootings, she was actually re-victimized. The Commission members note Lisa Banfield was the first one to be attacked, but was not treated as a survivor by the RCMP in the months that followed, eventually being charged for providing ammunition to the gunman.
It validates her experience and her feelings, which have been challenged and brought into question significantly the last 3 years.
During testimony to the inquiry, Banfield talked about the fear she lived with in a relationship that lasted over 19 years.
He put the gun to my head to scare me and said that he could blow off my head.
The charges she faced have been resolved after being moved to a restorative justice process, but the report says the RCMP's treatment of her could make it less likely for women who are survivors of gender-based violence to get help from the police. However, her lawyer today says the Commission's report provides hope.
Victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence are given a voice like never before. Their plight illustrated in this report with such clarity.
In their recommendations, the Commission members are calling for all levels of government to declare gender-based, intimate partner and family violence as an epidemic. And they don't stop there, making the same call to just about every organization. There is also a powerful plea to men to take action themselves.
Women have been carrying, through community-based organizations, the burden of protecting women almost exclusively for far too long. It's time for men to step up.
And to handle the scale of the problem, the report says there should be epidemic-level funding for prevention and intervention programs. Services, it says, have been underfunded for years to the point women's lives are endangered. A new measure the inquiry is now calling for is for the federal government to establish an independent gender-based violence commissioner with the responsibility to make annual reports to Parliament. The mandate could also include working with women who are survivors as another way to provide a national approach to the issue. Gareth Hampshire, CBC News, Halifax.
Many competitive athletes in Canada are calling for a change in the way sports organizations handle complaints, including those about harassment or abuse. Since 2018, private companies have stepped in to serve as independent third-party investigators for sports organizations. Nicole Williams has more in this report.
It had been more than 20 years since gymnast Amelia Klein competed, but she says a former coach who physically and verbally abused her as a child was still training athletes at the highest level. So a few years ago, she went to file a formal complaint.
He repeatedly told me that I should, quote unquote, manage my expectations about the complaint process.
The case manager was from Ottawa-based company ITP Sport and Recreation, and Klein says she never followed through with her complaint after their meeting.
Obviously, hearing that as a victim, as a survivor, it's incredibly re-traumatizing, it's invalidating.
Since 2018, ITP Sport has taken on roughly 1,000 safe sport cases across the country, including Miriam De Silva Rondos, who alleged a toxic culture within Boxing Canada. She and other athletes say the firm minimized their concerns, communicated sporadically, and took many months to only conclude at times that an issue was out of its scope.
My hope was shattered. Yeah, for a lot of athletes, our hope were shattered.
And then there's the financial interest. Critics question how companies like ITP can stay objective when they're paid by the sport federations they're tasked to investigate.
An investigation is not independent if it is paid for by the very institution that has something to lose with negative findings.
Since 2018, at least a dozen private companies have sprung up to serve as third-party safe sport investigators. Organizations hire them to handle complaints. They need to, or risk losing federal funding. ITP partner Allison Forsyth is a former Olympic skier and abuse survivor herself. In a statement, she says the work the company is doing is paramount for athletes. The company's founder says their work is complicated but objective.
We're working with the complainant and the respondent. The party is not involved. I think we're absolutely neutral. There's no influence for the individuals who pay us.
The ITP leadership team actually says it would welcome regulation of its industry so that investigations by companies like theirs could be audited and any wrongdoing could be highlighted and corrected if necessary. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
9 people have been killed in a crash involving 2 U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters. It happened in Kentucky. We'll bring you the latest after the break. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. 9 members of the United States military have been killed in a night training exercise. 2 Black Hawk helicopters crashed during a medical evacuation drill in Kentucky.
At approximately 10 p.m. last night, 2 of our Black Hawk helicopters were involved in a crash during a planned training flight in Cadiz, Kentucky, that resulted in the death of all 9 service members aboard the aircraft.
One of those helicopters was carrying 4 soldiers. The other had 5 aboard it. The identities of the victims have not yet been released because the military says it is still contacting families. A military investigation team has been sent to the scene in an effort to determine the cause of the crash. The U.S. Army says the helicopters were flying in formation and crew members were wearing night vision goggles. The weather was clear and calm and was not considered a factor at the time. No one on the ground was hurt. King Charles is on the 2nd day of his visit to Germany, his first foreign trip as monarch. Today, he became the first member of the British royal family to address German parliament, the Bundestag. The King's speech in both English and German was met, as you can see, with a standing ovation. He paid tribute to historic ties between the 2 nations and praised the support each country has shown Ukraine since the Russian invasion. King Charles' trip comes as the United Kingdom seeks to strengthen ties with the European Union after Brexit. Tomorrow, King Charles and the Queen Consort Camilla will visit the northern port city of Hamburg in the final day of their trip. Meteorologist John Sauder joins us now. We're going to talk about stormy weather, stormier than we have in John's forecast, certainly. But I know there's some storms that people will just never forget.
Yeah, 2022 was quite a year for damaging storms, and the name Fiona will never be heard again in Atlantic Canada, at least when we're talking about tropical storms. The World Meteorological Organization has retired the names Fiona and Ian from its list of tropical storm names. This is common practice after storms cause considerable damage, as these 2 did last year. Fiona slammed into Atlantic Canada in September, bringing significant damage and loss of life, and it was the costliest extreme weather event on record in Atlantic Canada, causing $4 billion in damage. Then there was Ian that hit southwestern Florida as a Category 4 hurricane. Ian caused a devastating storm surge that was responsible for over 150 deaths and over $112 billion in damage, making it the costliest hurricane in Florida's history. The new names for storms starting with F or I, Farah and Idris. All right, let's get to our own weather. Much calmer, -3 right now in Winnipeg. Now, we did get to -1 downtown, and that's our number in Selkirk, Ely, and St. Laurent. Down the road in Morris, it is -6 right now. Steinbach sitting at -4. So, yes, temperatures coming up a little bit more today, and that lack of wind made it pretty comfortable outside. There you see the numbers out to the west, a -1 in Brandon right now, 0s for Pinawa, Sprague, and Kenora. And then to the north, we're seeing some of that warmer air just edging into the western edge of the province and into Norway House with some -4s right now. Thompson at -7, Churchill still at -18 degrees. So lots of clear sky, the sun really helping, and where there is a forested canopy, that sun really makes a difference, and those areas tend to be a little bit warmer on these sunny days, warmer than, say, a snow-covered field. So -11 right now, or as the forecast low tonight in Kenora, -16 in Red Lake, and we'll see a little bit of cloud around. There's a slight chance of a flurry in and around the Fort Francis area. Here, not much cloud, just a few clouds down to -12 in Winnipeg, pretty close to that number in surrounding regions, and Barons River down to -19 tonight. And then as we look at the southwest, Brandon, you'll drop to -15, -18 in Swan River, And we'll see some cloud, but not much. And then across the north, we're looking at temperatures that are into the -20s, even mid-20s for Churchill. Now, tomorrow, another sunny day, at least to start with, but we'll start to see some light snow getting into western regions and then just nosing over into Thompson into the afternoon. But you can see in the west, it would be a wet snow at 0 in Flin Flon. Here across the south, the difference will be the wind. Lots of sunshine, but winds will be northerly at about 30 to 40 kilometers per hour. And then maybe some gusts a little bit higher. But as winds turn around to the south on Saturday, it will be much windier with gusts 50 or higher. 0 in the Sunshine in Kenora tomorrow, -1 in Dryden, -2 in Red Lake, and 2 degrees with a sun-cloud mix in Fort Frances.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Coming up, are you considering getting a pool or a hot tub? Don't be left high and dry. We get tips on how to protect yourself and your money following a CBC Marketplace investigation. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News.
When she was ordering a pool from you, she was in the middle of several...
Winnipeg is a place, Manitoba is a province where we can all come together, irrespective of our backgrounds.
In this province, we have so many more things in common than separate.
Within the first year,
of coming to Manitoba. I feel that I do belong in this place.
Well, I belong to Manitoba.
We happen to be in one of the Indigenous capitals of the world.
A home base for so many different groups, and they're all welcome here. That's what makes me feel part of this place.
A recent CBC Marketplace investigation looked into complaints against a Winnipeg man. Kurt Whitten has been selling prefabricated pools for years, taking big deposits, but when it comes time to deliver these fancy pools, dozens of customers tell CBC they've been waiting months, even years, with no pool delivered and no refunds. Customers across North America call him a con man, a scam artist, and worse. He's facing lawsuits worth $500,000, but no criminal charges. Chris Rowan is president of the Manitoba chapter of the Pool Hot Tub Council. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
What went through your mind when you first heard about this CBC investigation?
Well, I mean, I really felt bad for those people that were scammed out of money. Another thought that I had was it's really tainting our industry. And unfortunately, there's been a few companies over the last few years who have created that bad name and bad reputation for our industry. And as the president of the Manitoba Prairie chapter of the Pool Council, I felt it was necessary to respond. Just to provide the resource for this Pool Council provides a resource for consumers. And basically what it is it's an accredited group of companies that is held to really high standards of building and providing great product and services in the pool industry.
Now, we should say that Mr. Whitten told CBC he's hoping to clear up all of the outstanding issues he has with clients. Of course, he is being sued by several people. Now, if I was going to buy a pool, I know I can check the Better Business Bureau, for example. How could your council help?
Well, basically, a lot of the research that consumers are having to do towards finding a business to hire is they have to do the research on their own. The Pool and Hot Tub Council, they hold all of our members really accountable, and there's annual reviews, and the review upon applying for the membership is done as well. So it's really hands-off for the consumer, and it's a resource that I don't think has been made aware to the public as an option.
So there are pool companies, though, in Manitoba that are not members of your council.
Correct, yeah.
And they may be great people to deal with.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of great companies in Manitoba, across Canada, and everything like that. Unfortunately, some of the bad apples have really tainted our industry. So at the end of the day, it's a great resource. You can find it on poolcouncil.ca. You can locate all members in your geographical region. And it's a quick resource for knowing that the company that you're hiring has had background checks done on them. They have to prove liability insurance. So really, for peace of mind for the consumer, it's a pretty great resource. And I don't think the public has known about it before.
Pools are such a big investment. Chris, what's your last piece of advice for people out there who might be thinking of buying one?
Well, I would just consider to, of course, do your research, look into, word of mouth is always a great reference, but a viable resource is this Pool and Hot Tub Council, which right now a lot of bricks and mortar stores are applying for memberships. And it's a hands-off process for the customer to know that, hey, you're hiring a great company, you have nothing to worry about. The other great part of it is there's educational training courses on our council. So all of our members are actually actively doing training courses. So on top of hiring a reputable company, you're also hiring a more educated company. And I think there's a big value in that.
Chris Rowan of the Pool and Hot Tub Council, Manitoba chapter, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Meteorologist John Sauder is back with his 7-day forecast for you after the break, and then we'll have your daily lift. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News.
All right, here is your 7-day forecast. And by the way, we're on day 9 of straight sunshine right now. We'll probably get 10 and 11 here by the time we get halfway through the weekend. And then a bit of a messy day on Sunday. A lot of that's going to melt on contact. Could even see some freezing rain in the morning. And then back into slightly below normal weather next week. And we could see snow with wind on Wednesday. People from across the country feeling particularly lucky are flocking to a tiny Ontario town.
Now, John,
yes.
Why would they be doing that? Could it be because the town has a big lottery with a possible record payout tonight?
Possibly.
Here's your Daily Lift.
I'm going to win it, I know that.
What are you going to do with it?
Oh, spend it, pay off my kid's mortgage.
Somebody said about a half hour from the arena to get in your tickets.
What do you think about this?
This is great. I live in Hagersville, so it's great. Yeah.
Have you heard of people like coming from out of province or?
I heard a couple of weeks ago, I heard people had taken a plane in.
Hagersville's Catch the Ace lottery has hit a new record, $1.76 million in a potential payout. For more than 10 months, there have been weekly winners, but so far no one's picked up the golden card, the Ace of Spades, which gets you the big pot of money. Tonight, with only 8 cards left in the deck, there's a frenzy of interest. More than 80,000 tickets were sold in a week, and that's in a town of 3,000. Of course, Toronto's only 90 minutes away, so, you know, I'm imagining people are driving in as well as flying in. The money raised, John, will go to local charities. The Lions Club is one of the groups putting this on, and they say they're going to give at least half to the local food bank and use the rest for Lions Club projects.
That's great. So people buying tickets are actually helping the community as well?
Exactly.
Oh, wow. That's exciting.
It would be exciting, wouldn't it? And even if they don't get the lucky Ace of Spades, they still get like 20% of what was sold that day, so 170 grand.
Awesome.
Have a wonderful day and good luck.
See you later.